The offer didn't arrive with a handshake. It arrived as a PDF attachment at 3:42 in the morning. I knew something was fundamentally wrong the moment I scanned the document. There had been no technical gauntlet to run, no whiteboard coding sessions, and no grueling behavioral interviews with HR reps asking where I saw myself in 5 years. Even the background check seemed non-existent, or perhaps they already knew everything they needed to know. There was just a brief, audio-only call with a woman whose voice sounded frictionless, like generated speech. Her instructions were cryptic but memorable. "We don't care about your methodology. We care about the blast radius. We want to see what breaks after you arrive." The entity was called Northline Systems. It was a mid-sized operation, draped in generic corporate branding. Their logo was a simple geometric shape that suggested nothing. They weren't famous, they didn't chase headlines, and finding concrete information about their revenue streams was frustratingly difficult. They were the kind of company designed to be invisible, back-end infrastructure for things you use but never think about. The salary, however, was impossible to ignore. It was high, suspiciously high. It was pay off your mortgage in 3 years high. My official title was Strategic Integration Consultant. It was a hollow string of buzzwords that granted me absurd privileges. I was told I would have unrestricted administrative access to internal tools, repositories, board meeting minutes, and legal documentation from minute 1. "That's reckless security practice," I had mentioned during the initial call, trying to sound professional. "Yes," the woman replied, her tone flat. "So is the timing of your hire." I signed. Greed and curiosity are a potent mix. Day 1 wasn't spent in an office. It was spent in my apartment, staring at a company-issued laptop that arrived via courier an hour before my shift started. As soon as I logged in, the notifications began. I wasn't just invited to Slack channels, I was forcibly added to all of them. Engineering, product, executive legal, even a dormant channel labeled Legacy, Do Not Archive. There was no welcome email, no upbeat HR onboarding packet with pictures of smiling employees, just raw, unfiltered access to the company's nervous system. At 11:42 a.m., the first direct message pinged. "Unknown user. Don't optimize anything in your first week." I frowned, hovering my cursor over the profile. It was a ghost account, no avatar, no full name, created less than 4 hours ago. Me. Why not? That's what I'm here for. The typing indicator waved for a second, then the reply snapped onto the screen. "Unknown user. Because if you improve something, we'll know you're not the person we actually hired." I lean back in my chair, the mesh creaking in the silence of my apartment. Outside, the city traffic hummed along, oblivious, but here, in the glow of the monitor, the temperature seemed to drop. I realized then that I wasn't a consultant. I wasn't a fixer. I was a variable. I was being observed. Later that afternoon, I joined a product synchronization call. It was a sea of black screens and muted mics. Eventually, the CTO shared his screen, a roadmap slide for the upcoming quarter. I squinted. It didn't match the documentation I had browsed in the repository an hour prior. The dates were shifted, feature sets swapped, subtle strategic discrepancies. I unmuted myself. "Sorry to interrupt, but this timeline contradicts the Q3 master doc in the repo. Are we pivoting?" The audio line went dead silent. For a long, uncomfortable moment, nobody spoke. Then the CTO's camera flickered on. He looked tired, but he was smiling. "Good catch," he said softly. "Which version do you think is real?" I hesitated. "I honestly don't know." "Perfect," he replied, killing the camera feed. The call ended abruptly. That night, the laptop sat on my coffee table like a dormant bomb. A new notification lit up the dark room. It was the same unknown user. "Unknown user. You've been flagged as compliant." I picked up the machine, typing rapidly. Me, compliant with what? The typing bubble appeared, pulsed rhythmically, then vanished. I waited, my heart rate picking up. A full minute passed before the text finally appeared. Unknown user, with not asking the wrong questions too early. I closed the laptop slowly, the magnetic latch clicking shut with finality. The realization washed over me, cold and clarifying. I wasn't hired to steal trade secrets. I wasn't hired to fix their code or streamline their teams. I was hired to leak uncertainty. I was noise in the signal. By simply existing, by having a title and access, I was creating a signature that someone, somewhere outside this company, was tracking. Somewhere in a competitor's war room, analysts were likely already panicking, trying to figure out why Northline had just hired a high-level consultant. They were reacting to my shadow before I had even cast it. The first breach didn't come through a phone call or a hacked password. It came through the one place I assumed was mundane enough to be safe, my calendar. 3 days into the job, a notification slid onto my screen, bypassing all approval filters. It wasn't an invite, it was a summons. Market alignment discussion, confidential. There was no organizer listed, no agenda attached, just a solitary encrypted video link and a time slot that started in 2 minutes. My finger hovered over the decline button. Every instinct I had as a professional screamed that this was a phishing test, a trap set by Northline to see if I leaked. But curiosity is a heavy anchor. I clicked join. I kept my camera off and my microphone muted, waiting in the digital void. A man appeared on screen, instantly. He was in his early 40s, wearing a blazer over a t-shirt, that carefully curated, relaxed executive look. He sat in a glass-walled office, the background blurred just enough to obscure details, but not enough to hide the context. "Thanks for making the time," he said. His voice was warm, confident, and utterly terrifying because he spoke as if we were old friends. "We've been tracking your trajectory for a while." I unmuted, my voice dry. "I'm not sure who you are." "That's fine," he replied. A knowing smile touched his lips. "We know who you are." He didn't say the company name. He didn't have to. Through the digital blur behind him, I recognized the distinct color palette of a Kanban board. It was Northline's primary competitor, the giant, the one that dominated the market share. "You joined Northline recently? Congratulations, that's a bold move." "Thank you," I said, measuring every syllable. "We were surprised," he added, leaning in slightly, his eyes searching the black square where my video feed should have been. "We were surprised because you turned us down last year." I froze. I hadn't turned them down. I had applied, followed up twice, and received a generic automated rejection letter at 3 a.m. But looking at him now, I realized he believed I had rejected them. "We're not here to recruit you," he said, his tone shifting from friendly to analytical. "We're here to understand what kind of signal you represent." That word again, signal. "I'm just doing my job," I deflected. "Exactly," he countered, "and given your profile, that's precisely what worries us." Ping. My Slack notification sound cut through the tension like a gunshot. I glanced at the secondary monitor. Unknown user. Answer honestly, not completely. My heart hammered against my ribs. They were watching. Of course they were. They were monitoring my screen, listening to my audio, perhaps even tracking my keystrokes. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "What exactly do you want to know?" The man on the screen smiled wider, sensing a crack in the wall. "Why did Northline hire you without a technical interview? Why bring in a specialist for a legacy integration when they're rumored to be pivoting to AI?" I hesitated, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "I assume they were in a hurry," I said, adhering to the instructions. Honest, but incomplete. "Interesting. the man murmured, making a note on his desk. So were we. The call ended without pleasantries. The windows simply closed, leaving me staring at my desktop wallpaper. No follow-up email, no confirmation, as if the meeting had been hallucinated. Except, 10 seconds later, my calendar refreshed. A second meeting appeared for next Tuesday. Same title, different encrypted link. I couldn't focus on work. That evening, as the city lights flickered on outside, I finally clicked on the channel I had ignored. Legacy, do not archive. It wasn't just a chat log, it was a graveyard. There were thousands of messages, scrolling back years. I began to read, digging through the digital strata of the company's history. It was full of quiet arguments, strategy shifts, and postmortems for projects that never launched. Then, I found the pinned message at the very top, dated 5 years ago. If you're reading this and you don't know why you're here, you're doing it right. I started scrolling through the user lists, cross-referencing names on LinkedIn. A pattern began to emerge, stark and undeniable. The names weren't just employees, they were markers. Every time Northline hired someone with a profile like mine, someone with a specific, somewhat vague seniority hired rapidly and visibly, chaos followed in the market. Not inside Northline, outside. I saw a senior architect hired 3 years ago. 2 weeks later, a major competitor delayed their flagship product launch by 6 months, likely spooked by the signal that hire sent. I saw a compliance officer hired last year. A week later, an acquisition deal between 2 rivals collapsed because they suddenly feared a regulatory crackdown that never came. Northline wasn't stealing secrets. They were projecting illusions. They were weaponizing corporate paranoia. By hiring specific people, they tricked their competitors into swerving to avoid imaginary obstacles. My Slack pinged again, making me jump. Unknown user. You're being mirrored now. Me? By whom? Unknown user. By people who think your presence is intentional, by analysts who think you are the first step of a master plan. A chill ran through me, colder than the air conditioning. I wasn't a spy. I wasn't even a consultant. I was a scarecrow. I was a decoy with credentials placed in a field to make the crows fly the other way. And the worst part, I was starting to understand why they chose me. I was perfect for it. I was competent enough to look real, but unremarkable enough to be confusing. My calendar buzzed again. I expected another invite from the competitor, but this one was internal. Failure review. Mandatory. Host, the CEO. I stared at the screen. I hadn't failed at anything yet. I hadn't even done anything yet. But apparently, in this company, failure wasn't a mistake. It was a scheduled event.
The calendar invite said quarterly sync, scheduled for 15 minutes. It was a lie. The meeting lasted 2 grueling hours. There were 10 faces on the call, arranged in a grid of high-definition apathy, all senior leadership, all sitting in expensive, soundproofed rooms, pretending this was just another Tuesday. The CEO didn't look like a villain. He looked like a weary adjunct professor, wire-rimmed glasses, a cardigan, a background filled with unread books. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't accuse anyone, he didn't even look disappointed. That was the terrifying part. "We are gathered here to review a failure that hasn't happened yet," he said softly, folding his hands on the table. "But statistically speaking, it is overdue." The silence on the line was heavy, thick with unspoken implications. He turned his gaze to my video feed. "You joined us as an external variable," he continued, "a shiny object, someone our competitors would obsess over while our own teams ignored you." I felt the heat rise in my neck. "So I'm a distraction?" "No," he corrected gently. "You are a catalyst. You were never meant to deliver outcomes, Mr. Evans. You were meant to influence timing." A slide appeared on the shared screen, replacing the grid of faces. It was titled Strategic Inefficiencies. Beneath the title were 3 scenarios, each more damaging than the last. The vaporware leak. I accidentally upload specs for a revolutionary AI feature that doesn't exist, forcing competitors to burn millions trying to replicate it. The compliance trap. I flag a critical flaw in our data privacy, causing a public delay that baits rivals into rushing their own launch and making mistakes. The phantom pivot. I start scheduling meetings with hardware vendors, signaling a shift to physical products, sending the market into a speculative frenzy. All of these are survivable, the CEO said, his voice void of emotion. For us, but for them, they trigger panic responses. He leaned closer to the camera. You joined us as a failure to choose, he continued. Pick one, execute it by Friday, make it look clumsy, make it look real. My Slack buzzed on the second monitor. Unknown user. This is the moment most people say yes. I stared at the blinking cursor. My chest felt tight. I wasn't just a decoy anymore. I was being asked to pull the trigger. And if I say no, I asked, my voice echoing in my empty apartment. The CEO leaned back, his expression unreadable. Then nothing happens. You continue your consultancy, you draw your paycheck. He paused. But a consultant who generates no noise is suspicious, and suspicion leads to investigation. The threat was elegant. Do your job, or we expose you as a fraud. The call ended without a goodbye. The screen went black, leaving me with my reflection. That night, the paranoia set in. I paced my apartment, checking the router, taping over the webcam. When I finally sat down, I opened my personal email, on a burner phone, off the Wi-Fi. There was a message waiting. Subject, the signal. It was from the competitor, the man in the blazer. We know what they're asking you to do. We know about the scenarios. Let's talk. There's a bonus structure for double agents. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Two massive entities, one role, both assuming I belonged to them, both assuming I was just a cog in their machine. I realized then what neither of them had said out loud. The moment I acted, the moment I leaked the fake specs or took the competitor's money, I became traceable. I became liable. I became a loose end. But if I did nothing, I remained invisible. And if I did something else, well, that was uncharted territory. I opened a blank text document, not on the company laptop, on my own air-gapped machine. I didn't write code, I didn't steal trade secrets, I simply told the truth. I started compiling the data, the hiring dates of consultants like me over the last 5 years, the correlation with competitor stock dips, the accidental leaks that perfectly timed with rival product launches, the meeting invites, the ghostly unknown user logs. I built a timeline. I stripped away the names, but kept the dates. It wasn't a story about one company. It was a story about an industry-wide practice of weaponized incompetence, the decoy protocol. I encrypted the file. Then I didn't send it to the competitor. I didn't send it to the CEO. I sent it to a journalist I'd been following for years, a quiet, investigative reporter who wrote the kind of boring, dense financial articles that didn't go viral on Twitter, but caused board members to resign the next morning. I hit send. The upload bar filled. Green. Done. 30 seconds later, my company laptop woke up. Ping. Unknown user. That wasn't one of the options. I heart stopped. Were they watching the network traffic? No, that was impossible. I was on a private connection. Unless the unknown user wasn't a person, unless it was an algorithmic prediction model reacting to a deviation in my behavioral pattern. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. Me, you never said it wasn't allowed. Silence. The 3 dots of the typing indicator appeared. They danced for a long time. Then they vanished. The next morning, I expected to be locked out. I expected a call from legal. I expected a severance package or a lawsuit. But my login worked. The dashboard loaded. My access was still there. The legacy channel was still open. There was just one final message waiting for me in the DM window. Unknown user, you're no longer compliant. You are now a volatility factor. I smiled, taking a sip of cold coffee. That was fine, because now neither side knew where I stood. The journalist wouldn't publish for weeks. They needed to verify the sources. Until then, I was a walking bomb. If Northline fired me, it would confirm the story. If the competitor hired me, they'd inherit the risk. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city wake up outside my window. For the first time since I signed the contract, I didn't feel like a decoy. In the world of corporate espionage, information is currency, but uncertainty is the most expensive commodity of all. And I had just become the richest man in the room.
The article went live on a Tuesday morning, buried in the middle of a dense financial newsletter read only by algos and insomniac executives. There were no headlines screaming betrayal, no bold-faced company names, no whistleblower hero shots. It was just a long, dry, meticulously researched piece on the theory of behavioral signaling in high-frequency markets. It didn't accuse anyone of a crime, it simply connected the dots. It pointed out that in a world where data is perfectly encrypted, the only thing left to read is movement. By noon, the contagion had started. It didn't look like chaos, it looked like stillness. I watched the internal dashboards from my desk. Usually, the midday traffic on the company's servers was a roar of activity. Today, it flatlined. Meetings were vanishing from calendars like lights going out in a skyscraper. Product roadmaps were locked. 2 major product launches in the sector, competitors who had nothing to do with Northline on paper, were indefinitely postponed within the same hour. The market wasn't crashing, it was holding its breath. Northline didn't contact me, legal didn't storm my apartment, HR didn't freeze my accounts. That was the ultimate confirmation. If they fired me, they would validate the story. If they sued me, they would expose the strategy. So they did the only thing they could do. They ghosted me while I was still on the payroll. 3 days later, my calendar was completely empty. My access to the legacy channel was gone. Not revoked with a permission-denied screen, but simply vanished from the sidebar, as if it had never existed. I walked through the digital hallways of the company and nobody looked at me. I was a glitch that had corrected itself. That evening, the final message arrived. Unknown user, you misunderstood the assignment. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitor illuminating the dust motes in the air. I typed back slowly. Me. No, I outgrew it. The typing indicator pulsed for a long time. It felt different now, less like a manager, more like a confused machine trying to recalculate a broken variable. Unknown user, you introduced instability, you broke the prediction model. I smiled at that. Me, I didn't break it, I just made the invisible visible, and you can't manipulate what everyone can see. There was no reply. The account went offline. A moment later, the account was deleted. A week later, I read about a merger between 2 tech giants that quietly collapsed during due diligence. Another company replaced its entire C-suite overnight. A third announced an unexpected pivot to core values. None of them mentioned Northline. None of them mentioned the article. But the fear was palpable. The signal was no longer trusted. The weapon had been jammed. Northline itself didn't change at all. They kept their logo, their office, their vague mission statements, which told me everything I needed to know. They didn't need to win. They just needed to survive the silence until the noise started again. I resigned the following Monday. I didn't send a long letter. I didn't do an exit interview. I just left my badge and the laptop at the front desk. The receptionist didn't even look up. "We understand" was the only email I received in response. I work differently now. I don't take full-time contracts. I don't sit in open-plan offices. I don't accept generic job titles. I advise companies on what not to optimize. I sit in boardrooms with nervous executives and explain to them how signals travel faster than data. I teach them that their biggest vulnerability isn't in their code, it's in their calendar invites, their hiring spikes, their sudden silences. Sometimes when I'm finishing a presentation, I catch a specific look from a CEO or a director, a look of recognition. They think I'm there to help them build a better wall. They're wrong. I'm there to remind them that the glass is transparent. The most dangerous spy isn't the one who breaks into your server and steals your secrets. It's the one who stands perfectly still, letting you watch them until you start doubting your own reflection. And once that doubt exists, you don't need an enemy. You'll sabotage yourself.